There is a kind of cold that has nothing to do with the temperature outside. It settles into the bones of a town slowly, quietly, the way fog rolls off a Kentucky river before dawn, until the people who live there stop noticing it, until they simply accept it as part of the air they breathe. Harlan County, Kentucky. November 1997. Population, just over 36,000. A place where neighbors knew your full name, your daddy's full name, and probably your grandmother's biscuit recipe. A place where front doors were left unlocked and children walked home from school through the falling October leaves without a second thought from their parents. That was the place. That was the understanding. And then one Tuesday morning in November, a cold Tuesday, the kind that pressed its gray weight down on the hills like a hand pressing down on a bruise, a woman named Sandra Louise Combs did not come home from her morning walk. The coffee she had made at 6:47 a.m. was still sitting on the kitchen counter when her husband called the sheriff's office at noon. The cup was still warm, almost. The front door was standing open. Her dog, a brown beagle named Biscuit, was sitting on the porch steps, staring down the road with his head tilted to one side. The swing on the front porch hung perfectly still. The small red wagon belonging to her 4-year-old son lay on its side in the front yard. Everything was as it had been, and yet nothing was as it had been. To understand what happened to Sandra Combs, you have to understand Harlan County first. Harlan sits deep in the Cumberland Mountains of southeastern Kentucky, a county shaped by coal and by the particular stubbornness of people who have lived their entire lives in hollows and on hillsides that the outside world tends to overlook. The mountains there are ancient and dark green in the summer, burning amber and copper in October, and coal gray and skeletal by November. The town of Harlan itself is modest, a courthouse square, a handful of churches, a diner called Maud's on Main where the coffee was always fresh and the gossip was always fresher. The median household income in 1997 hovered just below $22,000. Most families had at least one member who had worked the mines or knew someone who had. It was that kind of place. The land shaped the people, and the people shaped each other. Sandra Louise Combs was 34 years old in November 1997. She had been born and raised in Harlan County, a Mullins girl originally, from up near the Bledsoe community, and she had married Dale Combs 6 years earlier, in the spring of 1991, in a ceremony at the First Baptist Church on Central Street that half the county had attended, because her mother had made the cake and her father had sung 2 hymns during the service. Dale Combs was 38, a soft-spoken man who worked for the county roads department, driving a maintenance truck along Route 421, and occasionally filling in shifts at his brother's auto parts store over in Cumberland. They lived in a pale yellow house on Ivy Branch Road, a quiet lane about 3 miles outside the town center. They had one child together, a boy named Thomas, who had just turned 4 that October, and who still slept with a small stuffed rabbit his grandmother had given him at birth. Sandra's morning routine was something her neighbors could have recited from memory. She woke at 6:15 every day. She made coffee, 1 pot black, with 2 tablespoons of sugar, and she drank the first cup standing at the kitchen window, watching the ridge line across the road brighten with whatever light the morning offered. By 6:50 or thereabouts, she put on her walking shoes, a pair of white New Balance trainers that had gone gray at the toes from the gravel road, and she walked. The same route every single morning. Down Ivy Branch Road to the end, left on County Road 22, up the small rise past the Combs family's old barn, which had been empty since Dale's father passed, and back the same way. The whole walk was 2 miles exactly. It took her roughly 35 minutes. She was always back before Thomas woke up. She was always home before 7:30. On the morning of Tuesday, November 11, 1997, Veterans Day, a federal holiday, which meant Dale Combs was home from work and sleeping in. Sandra made her coffee at 6:47 a.m. The time is known because Dale later told investigators he had heard the percolator from the bedroom and checked the clock on the nightstand out of habit. He heard the cabinet open and close. He heard her footsteps in the kitchen. He heard, or believed he heard, the front door close softly at approximately 7:00 a.m. He then fell back asleep. Thomas woke up crying at approximately 8:15. Dale got up, made the boy a bowl of cereal, and assumed Sandra had already returned and gone back out on some errand. He noticed Biscuit was on the porch, which was unusual. Sandra always brought the dog inside after her walk. He noticed the front door had not been fully latched. He noticed Sandra's coffee cup on the counter, still containing maybe 2 ounces of cold coffee. He did not, at that moment, find any of this alarming. He fed the boy. He watched television. He called Sandra's name once around 9 o'clock when he realized her car was still in the driveway and she had not come in from wherever she had been. Then he waited. Then he called her mother. Then, at 11:58 a.m., he called the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. "I just need somebody to come out here," he told the dispatcher. "My wife went for her walk this morning and she hasn't come back. I don't know where she's at." The dispatcher logged the call at 11:58. Deputies were dispatched at 12:04. What they found when they arrived on Ivy Branch Road was a scene that offered no clear answers. Sandra's walking shoes, the gray-toed New Balance trainers, were not in the house. Her wallet was on the kitchen counter next to her purse. Her cell phone, a Nokia brick model she had owned for less than a year, was sitting on the kitchen table. Her coat was on the hook by the door. It was 39 degrees outside. She had gone out without her coat, without her phone, without her wallet. She had gone out in the cold November morning in her walking shoes and a fleece pullover, and she had not come back. By 2:00 p.m. on November 11th, 4 sheriff's deputies were walking the route Sandra took every morning. They found nothing on Ivy Branch Road. They found nothing on County Road 22. Near the old Combs barn, a weathered gray structure that sat 60 yards back from the road at the top of the small rise, one deputy found a partial shoe impression in the frost-softened mud at the edge of the gravel. The impression was consistent with a women's size 7 shoe. Photographs were taken. The barn was checked. It was empty, as it always was. The hasp on the barn door was rusted and had not moved in some time. One detail would not surface until 2 days later, when a neighbor on County Road 22, a retired schoolteacher named Agnes Fugate, who lived in a white farmhouse set back from the road, mentioned to a deputy that she had seen a dark blue or dark green pickup truck parked on the gravel shoulder near the old Combs barn at some point that morning. She could not say what time. She could not make out the license plate. She could not say with certainty whether it had been there at 7 in the morning or 9. She offered this information almost apologetically, the way people do when they sense a detail is important but fear they cannot make it useful enough. The deputy wrote it in his notes. The truck was noted. And then, in the accumulation of tasks and pressures that follow any disappearance, it stayed there in the notes, on the page, quiet and patient. The swing on the front porch hung perfectly still in the November air. The small red wagon lay on its side in the frost-brown grass. Sandra Combs had walked out her front door that morning and had not come back, and in the hours and then days that followed, the town of Harlan held its breath and waited for an explanation that did not come. The formal search operation for Sandra Combs began at dawn on Wednesday, November 12, 1997, approximately 24 hours after she had last been seen. By 7:00 a.m., the Harlan County Sheriff's Office had assembled 2 search teams, one composed of deputies and one of volunteers from the county, and the Kentucky State Police had been notified and sent 2 additional officers to assist. The search corridor encompassed a 2-mile radius from the Combs' home on Ivy Branch Road, with priority given to the walking route, the surrounding woodlands, the hollow that ran behind the old Combs barn, and the dry creek bed that ran roughly parallel to County Road 22 before disappearing into a dense stand of second-growth hardwood. Volunteers came from across the county. By 9 o'clock that morning, there were more than 60 people walking grid lines through the hillside woods north of Ivy Branch Road. The Baptist church brought food at noon. The Methodist Women's Circle kept a table with coffee and water at the trailhead. 3 volunteer fire departments sent personnel. A tracking dog unit was brought over from Perry County by 11 that morning, and the dogs worked the route Sandra walked, covering the 2 miles in careful increments, the handlers studying the animal's behavior with the focused attention of people reading a language that only dogs can speak. The dogs moved normally along the route until they reached the area near the old Combs barn. There, the lead animal, a bloodhound named Reese, stopped, circled twice, pushed toward the gravel shoulder of County Road 22, and then lost the trail. Lost it entirely, as though Sandra Combs had simply ceased to leave a scent, as though she had been lifted from the road. This detail, the location where the trail vanished, corresponded almost exactly with the spot where Agnes Fugate had seen the dark pickup truck parked on the morning of November 11th. Those who knew Dale Combs said, in the days following Sandra's disappearance, that he appeared as any husband would. He was pale. He had the look of a man who had stopped sleeping. He stood in his front yard at intervals throughout the day, watching the road with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set hard. He cried at least once in front of the volunteers at the Baptist church, wiping his face with the back of his hand and thanking people for coming. He answered every question the deputies asked him. He asked several times when they were going to find her, and the quality of the asking, the flatness of it, the repetition, was something that at least 2 deputies noticed without being able to articulate precisely what it was that they noticed. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the timeline. Dale had last heard Sandra at approximately 7:00 a.m. He had not called the sheriff's office until 11:58 a.m., nearly 5 hours later. His explanation was consistent and calm. He had assumed she had gone to her mother's, or to the grocery store, or on some errand he had forgotten she had mentioned. But Sandra's car had been in the driveway the entire time. Sandra's wallet had been on the counter. Sandra's phone had been on the table. At some point in those 5 hours, each of those facts had been visible to Dale Combs, and he had called no one until nearly noon. Investigators also noted, and noted carefully, the question of the coat. The temperature on the morning of November 11th had been 39 degrees at 7. Sandra's coat, a dark green quilted jacket she wore regularly for her walks, according to multiple neighbors who had seen her in it, was hanging on the hook by the front door. Her fleece pullover was not a garment described by any neighbor as her typical cold weather walking attire. Whether she had left the house in a hurry, or whether she had not intended to go far, or whether something else entirely accounted for the missing coat, that was a question the investigation returned to more than once. The Kentucky State Police Major Case Unit was formally engaged on November 14th, 3 days after the disappearance. Detective Roy Abner, a 22-year veteran of the state police who had worked missing persons cases in eastern Kentucky for most of his career, was assigned as lead investigator. Abner reviewed the case notes, walked the route himself, spoke to Agnes Fugate about the dark truck, and sat across a kitchen table from Dale Combs for 2 hours on the afternoon of November 15th. In the notes he filed with the state police that evening, Abner wrote, "Subject cooperative and forthcoming. Emotional presentation appropriate but not pronounced. No overt indicators of deception. Timeline of morning events requires further clarification. Odometer reading on subject's personal vehicle. A 1994 Ford F-150, dark blue, to be confirmed against stated movements. The odometer reading. That single line, buried in 3 pages of procedural notes, would become significant in a way that no one fully recognized at the time. Dale Combs had told investigators he had not left the house on the morning of November 11th after Sandra left for her walk. He had stayed home with Thomas. He had not driven anywhere. The Ford F-150 dark blue had not moved. And yet when Detective Abner's team checked the vehicle's odometer against the reading Dale's own insurance company had on file from a routine inspection conducted on October 29, 1997, 13 days before Sandra's disappearance, the odometer reflected 22 additional miles that Dale Combs could not account for. 22 miles, in a county where the nearest town of any size was 11 miles away. If you have noticed in the telling of a story like this that the details which seem small are never actually small, you are paying the right kind of attention. The coat on the hook, the 5 hours of silence, the 22 miles. But evidence is not the same as proof, and proof is what a court requires. The search turned up no physical trace of Sandra Combs in the woods, the hollow, the creek bed, or the surrounding terrain. No blood, no clothing, no signs of struggle anywhere along the walking route. The dark pickup truck Agnes Fugate had seen was never conclusively identified. Several area residents owned dark-colored trucks, and none of them produced anything that advanced the investigation. By the end of November 1997, the physical search had been scaled back. By January 1998, with no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no direct physical evidence tying any individual to Sandra's disappearance, the case was formally reclassified. It went cold. Detective Abner's final active case note, dated January 9, 1998, read as follows: Investigation ongoing. All available leads exhausted at this time. Case file to be maintained for review. Family notified. Subject Dale Combs remains a person of interest pending new information. Person of interest. The phrase sat in a file folder in the Harlan County Sheriff's Records room, and the winter came, and the mountains closed around the town like a fist closing around something it does not intend to release. By the spring of 1998, Dale Combs had taken Thomas and moved out of the pale yellow house on Ivy Branch Road. The house was rented to a young couple from Benham. The swing on the porch was eventually taken down. The red wagon disappeared at some point, whether sold, given away, or simply lost to time. No one could say. Dale and Thomas moved into a rented duplex on the east side of Harlan, 3 blocks from the school the boy would eventually attend. Dale's mother looked after Thomas during the days. Dale returned to work at the county roads department. He was quiet. He was present when presence was required of him. He did not speak much about Sandra, and the town, after some time, stopped asking him to. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, or someone you are supposed to love, you understand the particular weight of that doubt. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with clarity or certainty. It settles in slowly, like the cold Harlan cold, and it makes you question the texture of everything you thought you knew. Sandra's mother, Helen Mullins, a small, precise woman in her late 60s who kept a garden behind her house on Bledsoe Road and who had known her daughter's morning walk schedule by heart, did not believe that Sandra had simply walked away from her life. She did not believe it for 1 hour of one day of the 26 years that followed. She told this to anyone who would listen, and she told it to the few who tried to suggest alternative explanations, and she told it to the photograph of Sandra that sat on her mantelpiece. A picture taken at Thomas's third birthday party. Sandra laughing at something outside the frame, her head tilted back the way it always was when she found something genuinely funny. Thomas Combs grew up in the absence of his mother the way children do, by accepting it as the architecture of his world, not because the absence did not hurt, but because children are built for endurance in a way that adults sometimes forget. He drew pictures, in kindergarten and first grade, that his teachers gently noted to the school counselor. Houses with only one figure in them, stick figure families with an empty space where a second adult should have been. He woke up some nights, his grandmother told people later, with nightmares he could not describe. He would sit on the edge of his bed and tell her that someone had been calling to him in his sleep, from somewhere he could not reach. He could not tell her who. He could not tell her from where. Dale Combs remarried in 2003, a woman named Brenda Caudle from Middlesbrough whom he had met through a coworker. Brenda was quiet and kind, and had 2 children of her own from a previous marriage. Those who attended the wedding described it as modest and pleasant. Those who were not invited, specifically, Helen Mullins, who had not been told about the ceremony until after it occurred, described something quite different when asked about it. "He didn't even wait 5 years to make sure my daughter was gone for good," Helen told a neighbor that summer. "He just went on. He just went right on." The marriage to Brenda lasted 4 years. It ended in 2007, quietly and without public incident, and Dale's attorney filed the dissolution papers in Harlan County Circuit Court in February of that year. In the course of those divorce proceedings, a detail that would not surface in its full significance until much later, Brenda Caudle told her own attorney that there were things about Dale she had not understood until she had been married to him for some time. She could not specify what those things were in legal terms. She said only that there were times when she would ask him about Sandra, and he would go somewhere behind his eyes that she could not follow, and that she had decided, eventually, that she did not want to follow him there. Years accumulated. The file in the sheriff's records room gathered no new pages. Detective Roy Abner retired in 2005 and moved to Lexington to be near his grandchildren. The new investigator assigned to cold cases in Harlan County, a younger man named Detective Craig Sizemore, pulled the Combs file as part of a routine cold case review in 2011 and found himself stopped by the same detail Abner had noted 14 years earlier: the odometer, the 22 miles. Sizemore made some calls. He drove out to Ivy Branch Road and stood at the spot where Agnes Fugate had seen the dark truck, looking at the road and the ridge and the old barn in the distance, doing the arithmetic of time and distance in his head. He filed a supplemental note in the case file. He got no further. Thomas Combs turned 27 years old in October 2020. He had grown up in Harlan, graduated from Harlan High School, attended a semester of community college in Middlesbrough, and eventually taken a job working for a water utilities company in Corbin, about an hour's drive north. He was a quiet young man with his mother's dark eyes, according to people who had known Sandra. He had not spoken to his father very often since Dale's second marriage had ended. They existed in the same county, as 2 points on a map that did not intersect with any frequency. In the fall of 2020, Thomas Combs found his mother's old journal. It had been in a box at his grandmother Helen's house, a cardboard box marked Sandra in black marker, pushed to the back of a closet shelf and not opened, apparently, since sometime in 1997 or 1998. Thomas did not read the journal in its entirety at first. He read the last several entries. He sat with them for a long time. Then he drove to his grandmother's living room and they sat together in front of the photograph on the mantelpiece. And Thomas told Helen that he thought there were things in what his mother had written that people needed to see. Helen Mullins took his hand and nodded, and said that she had been waiting 23 years for someone to open that box. The journal entries that Thomas Combs brought to the attention of authorities in the winter of 2021 covered a period of approximately 4 months prior to Sandra's disappearance. They were written in a small green spiral notebook, the kind sold at drugstores for $1 or $2 in Sandra's neat, slanted handwriting. The entries were not dramatic. They were not a declaration or an accusation. They were the careful, private record of a woman who was trying to understand the shape of her own life and the behavior of the man who shared it with her. In an entry dated August 14, 1997, Sandra had written, "D came home late again last night, third time this week. When I asked where he had been, he said the parts store, but the parts store closes at 6 and it was 9:30. I didn't push. I know I should push. I don't know what I'm afraid of finding." In an entry dated September 3, 1997, found a receipt in the truck, the Blue Ridge Motor Inn 2 counties over, September 1st. He told me he was at work all day September 1st. I put the receipt back where I found it. I don't know why I put it back. In an entry dated October 22, 1997, 20 days before she vanished, I told D today that I was going to talk to someone, that I was going to get some advice about what to do. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that if I did that it would destroy everything. I asked him what everything meant. He walked out of the room. Thomas was in the yard playing with his wagon. I watched him from the kitchen window for a long time. I watched his little red wagon going back and forth in the grass. I thought about what everything means. Detective Craig Sizemore received the journal in February 2021. He read it twice in a single evening. He called the Kentucky State Police Major Case Unit the following morning and requested that the Combs cold case be formally reopened. The KSB assigned 2 investigators, Detective Melissa Barton and Detective James Foley, who drove down from Frankfort in March 2021 and began the work of building the case from the foundation up, with 23 years of accumulated distance between the original incident and the present moment. What followed was painstaking. Barton and Foley interviewed Agnes Fugate, now 81 years old, still living in the white farmhouse on County Road 22, who confirmed every detail of her original statement and added one she had not provided in 1997, that the dark pickup truck had been parked on the shoulder for what she estimated to be at least 45 minutes, and that when it finally pulled away, she had noticed it was moving slowly, without urgency, back toward the Harlan town direction. She had told no one this detail in 1997 because no one had asked her specifically how long the truck had sat there. Barton and Foley interviewed Brenda Caudle, Dale's second ex-wife, who provided a signed statement recounting things Dale had said during their marriage that she had not previously reported to law enforcement, in part because she had not believed at the time that they constituted evidence of anything she could name. One of the statements she reported, delivered by Dale during an argument in the spring of 2005, was this: "You think I just let things happen to me? I decide what happens. I've always decided what happens." Forensic genealogy work commissioned by the KSB in August 2021 produced results that investigators had not initially anticipated. DNA material recovered from Sandra Combs's walking jacket, a garment that had been placed in the original evidence bag in November 1997 and had remained in storage at the county evidence facility for 24 years, was subjected to next-generation sequencing analysis. The material recovered was not Sandra's. It matched a partial profile consistent with a male individual. That male profile, when run through the national database and cross-referenced with genealogical records obtained through a court order, was consistent at a 99.6% confidence threshold with a male member of the immediate Combs family. Clears throat. On March 14, 2023, at 9:22 in the morning, Detective Melissa Barton and Detective James Foley, accompanied by 2 Harlan County deputies, drove to a residence on Sycamore Drive in Cumberland, Kentucky, where Dale Combs had been living since 2018, and knocked on the front door. Dale Combs answered the door in a gray undershirt and work pants, holding a mug of coffee. He looked at the 4 of them for a moment. Then he set his coffee down on the porch railing. Then he put his hands in his pockets. Detective Barton later described the moment in her case report. Subject showed no immediate verbal response. He looked at each of us in turn. His expression was not fear. It was not surprise. It was closer to the expression of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and has grown so accustomed to waiting that the thing arriving does not feel entirely real to him yet. Dale Combs was placed under arrest on March 14, 2023, and charged with the murder of Sandra Louise Combs. He was 53 years old. He did not speak during the arrest. He was read his rights on the porch of the house on Sycamore Drive, in the early March cold, with the Cumberland Mountains visible in every direction beyond the rooftops of the neighborhood. The news moved through Harlan County, the way news always moves through a place where everyone knows everyone, in phone calls and text messages, and across the counters of diner, and in the parking lots of churches, and in the quiet of living rooms where people sat and tried to absorb the weight of something they had suspected for years and had been unable to prove. Some people said they had known. Some people said they could not believe it. Some people, those who had been Dale's coworkers, his neighbors, the men he had played cards with on Friday evenings, said that the person they were hearing described in the news did not match the man they thought they knew. And that tension, between the man people thought they knew and the truth the evidence now described, is perhaps the oldest story a community can tell about itself. Helen Mullins was told by Thomas on the morning of the arrest. He drove to her house on Bledsoe Road before the news had broken publicly. He sat across from her at her kitchen table, the same table where Sandra had eaten breakfast as a girl, and he told her what had happened. Helen looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece for a long time. Then she folded her hands in her lap and she said, quietly, "I know. I always knew. I just needed someone else to know it too." The preliminary hearing for Dale Combs was held in Harlan County Circuit Court in June 2023. The courtroom was full. People stood in the hallway. Local media occupied 3 rows of the gallery. Dale Combs entered the courtroom in a gray suit and sat at the defense table with his attorney and looked at no one, his eyes fixed somewhere past the judge's bench, at a point in the middle distance that appeared to contain nothing. The DNA evidence was presented. The journal entries were read into the record. The odometer discrepancy, 22 miles unaccounted for, on the morning Sandra vanished was placed before the court as documented fact. When the judge found probable cause to proceed to trial, Dale Combs showed no reaction. He straightened the jacket of his suit very slightly with one hand. He kept his eyes on that middle distance point. And then deputies escorted him out, and the courtroom exhaled, and Helen Mullins put her hand over her mouth and wept without making any sound. Music holds, the cello note sustains. Sandra Louise Combs has never been found. Her physical remains have not been located as of the date of this telling. The case for her murder rests on the weight of forensic evidence, circumstantial record, and the quiet precision of a green spiral notebook in which a woman wrote down the things she was afraid to say out loud. The trial of Dale Combs is pending in Harlan County Circuit Court. He has entered a plea of not guilty. There is a thing that happens in the aftermath of a case like this, after the arrest, after the headlines, after the community's long exhale of recognition, where people try to locate the moment when things could have been different, when the evidence could have been pursued more urgently, when the questions could have been pressed harder, when the girl in the kitchen watching her son's red wagon in the yard could have found a way out of whatever was closing around her. Those reckonings are important. They are how communities hold themselves accountable. They are how investigators learn to look more carefully the next time, at the coat on the hook, and the 5 hours of silence, and the 22 miles no one asked enough questions about. But the deepest truth of this case is not about the investigation. It is about Sandra Combs herself, a woman who woke before dawn to walk a 2-mile road through the Kentucky hills, who made coffee and watched the ridge line brighten, who wrote careful private sentences about things she was trying to understand, who looked out a kitchen window at her small son and thought about what everything means. She was 34 years old. She had a beagle named Biscuit and a son named Thomas and a laugh that tilted her head back when it was genuine. She was a person whose life had a texture and a history that no disappearance and no courtroom proceeding can fully restore to the record. But the record tries. The record is obligated to try. Thomas Combs is 30 years old now. He still has his mother's dark eyes. He found the journal. He drove to his grandmother's house and he sat with her in front of the photograph, and in doing so, he changed the direction of what a 23-year-old silence had been pointing toward. That matters. How a person chooses to act in the presence of something painful and unresolved. That matters in ways that outlast the moment of choosing. Sandra Louise Combs walked out her front door on a cold Kentucky morning in November 1997. She has not been forgotten. She should not be forgotten. Her name is Sandra. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.